Good morning and welcome to another 50 Good Reasons, 50 Acres webinar. Today we're going to look at preparing in an election year, which is sort of not a calendar year as such, but it's a sort of 12-month year I'm taking it as. So it'd be really good to talk to you about that and think about getting our heads around what we need to be doing and thinking about, because there's quite a few things that are going to be happening between now and then. But before I start, I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging in the area of which I live, which is the land of the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to any Indigenous people that are listening today or tuned in, joining us today. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. Might be a few more people that are joining as we progress. We're up to about 30, but that's good. So before we start, there's a lot happening today. I have the television on, and as some of you may do, it'd be really interesting to see if any of you got ABC 24 on to see when Julian Assange might walk out of the courtroom in Saipan and get on a plane and come to Canberra, which is sort of really interesting. And of course, there's the State of Origin today. Now, I know they're not on the same level. I know one is much more important than the other. You can, take it. You can take it as read. What I might think is more important, depending on the day. But we 50 Acres did support the Assange campaign on a pro bono basis in the last 12 or 18 months, with some limited amount of media distributing email media releases to the press gallery in Canberra. So we did a tiny amount in the big picture of things over the last period of time that this campaign has gone on. And I know people may have different opinions in terms of what they think about what was originally undertaken by WikiLeaks, but I do think uniformly across the parliament, most people are probably of the view that this is something that needs to be brought to a close, which looks like is going to happen today. So that's a good thing. Be interesting to see Julian is apparently flying to Canberra and arriving tonight. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens tomorrow, whether or not what he does in terms of some sort of public event. But keep watching. But before then, we've got the State of Origin tonight. Now, I know many of you are joining from states that may not necessarily prioritise rugby league, but I live in New South Wales and grew up in Sydney, and so therefore rugby league is in my blood. And you probably know I will be supporting the Blues, and hopefully they'll win tonight. So there you go. I have back to business. I have the Q&A box open. If anyone's got any comments or questions as we progress, please pop them in the Q&A box and I'll jump in and answer them, or any comments that you want to make. Really happy to do that and jump in. And of course, if anyone's got any questions after the webinar today, we'll be sending out the recording and the slide deck later today. If anyone's got any questions that we can help with, please don't hesitate to email me. Always happy to answer questions at any time. So let's start thinking about what we're here to talk about today, which is the next federal election. It seems only yesterday we had one, doesn't it, really? But that's the nature of democracy, isn't it? I suppose it keeps going. So the election is going to happen. We've got a whole lot of slides here, but let me just give you a bit of a preview. The election is going to happen at some stage between now and August next year. The federal government has indicated that the budget will happen in March next year. They've moved it formally to March. It's normally in May, the first week of May, the first Tuesday in May. And they have moved it, indicated it is moving to March, so that to allow some breathing space for an election. That could mean anything. When I've had discussions with people, in the Prime Minister's office, friends of mine who are in there, as probably people know, been on webinars with me before, or even perhaps know anything about what my background is. I've gone through, sort of Labor Party ranks and the junior wing of the Labor Party, Young Labor, with many of the people in the cabinet, including the Prime Minister and lots of cabinet ministers, and many of the Prime Minister's advisors are friends of mine. And when I've recently spoke to one or two of them, they indicated that it would be a interest rate cut which would prompt an election being called this year. Looking at the predictions, and I'm no economist, but it seems like that is unlikely. If anything, it seems like there might be an interest rate hike, which is not what the government wants. But, you know, I'm not an economist and I cannot predict the future, unfortunately. I just like interest rates to go down so my mortgage reduces. But anyway, that's just me. So who knows, but it looks unlikely that there'll be an interest rate cut this year. Hence, there'll probably be a less likelihood that thanks, Ian. My understanding is it can go as late as August next year. I may be wrong on that. I think I'm pretty sure, but I think it can be as late as August. But I may be wrong on that. If someone else has got a view, please throw it my way. I tell you what I'll do. I will absolutely double check that and email that to people that are listening in today. One of the things that's going to always prompt a Prime Minister to call an election will be that they will go when they think they will win. And there's a lot of factors at the moment at play, and we'll go through those in a minute. It's a really interesting environment politically, and I think, you know, I'm a political nerd. I've been involved with politics all my life. You know, my first job out of university was working for a minister. I've always worked in politics, and I'll get to your question in a second, Jean, about what's the best time to hold elections. You know, I've always worked in politics, and so it's sort of in my blood and in my bones. I will sit and watch, you know, no offense to anyone in Tasmania, I live in Sydney, I live in New South Wales. I will sit and watch the Tasmanian election results with no real understanding of exactly who the people are. I just like watching election results, and I'm interested in elections. So this is particularly interesting, and we'll get to why that is in a second. There's lots and lots and lots of factors at play. Jean's asked what's the best time to hold elections. I think the best time is, thanks, Alex, I'll make that point to people. The best time for people to hold an election is when they're going to win. It's typically not a good time to hold an election over our summer. So typically you won't see people, federal election that is, hold an election over the summer because people like to chill out, right? And equally in winter, cold. People don't like, it's not great for campaigning. People don't necessarily like to go out and do stuff in winter. So, you know, but that's broad, right? If there's interest rate cut in December, I reckon you'd probably see an election in January. You know, it's just one of those weird things. So, you know, who knows? But I think it's always possible. So someone's just driven. Someone's just. Not much exciting happens here, but just 1 second, everyone. My dog is now barking because someone's just driven down my driveway. It doesn't really happen all that often. We live 2 kilometers from the road. Bear with me 1 sec. Sorry, I'm just going to push ahead. It's actually someone reading the electricity meter. We'll be gone in a second. So sorry, I had to deal with my barking dog, which is a lovely dog, but he's barking. So give me 1 second. Sorry about that interruption, everyone. The man has now gone, or the person has gone. Alex makes the point that according to the Parliamentary Library, the latest election for House of Reps and half Senate election is 17th of May 25. So thanks so much for that, Alex. I looked like as well. My apologies. So yeah, what's the best time to have a whole election? When you think you can win, fundamentally, Jane. So let's just kick on and have a think about what we need to think about. Just give me 1 second and I'll move on to the next slide. We're all going well here, aren't we? Oh. Oh, that's good. Going really well. So what are we going to cover today? What we're going to cover is looking at the analysis of the current landscape. Now, hopefully we will have some silence from the dogs. Developing a pitch to government in terms of, government and opposition and candidates. What do you think? What do you need to think about in terms of an election campaign and how you might get involved with it? Integrating your communications into your engagement strategy. So that's really fundamental. You can engage with government about stuff, but what will really help leverage and power on your engagement and asks will be perhaps popularizing or publishing and publicizing what it is you're thinking about. And then thinking about implementation and monitoring. What do you need to actually make sure you can get this across the line? A year's a long time, and you need to be able to think about how you can resource it, what you need to do, how you need to prioritize it, and what you need to do to set up to be across stuff, because there's a lot of moving parts in politics, as you can imagine. So what's the current political landscape? Let me just see whether I can get a better view of this. That's better. So obviously we've got Labor in government. Early polling for the federal election suggests a likely Labor win over the coalition. What does that mean? At the moment, they hold a very slim majority in the House. It's been really interesting. There's been a couple of coalition members who've gone to the crossbench. They're likely to lose their seats or stand down. So those seats will probably go back to the coalition. But we'll get to the independents in more detail in a second, but they're going to play a really big part in terms of what's going on. There's a growing momentum for support of independent candidates, which we'll explore in a moment. Holly has a question, or you've got a raised hand. Holly, did you want to ask a question? Just pop it into the Q&A box if you could. So, there's growing dissatisfaction with Labor and Prime Minister Albanese, and to some extent, there's growing dissatisfaction with both major parties. We'll get to that in a minute. The latest Roy Morgan survey suggests if a federal election was held now, the result would be a hung parliament, with Labor likely to form a minority government with the support of minor parties and independents. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I think, it really does reflect sort of international developments in this space, and Australia's sort of catching up to the fact that coalition, not coalition in terms of big C, but coalition governments in terms of small c are a possibility and not necessarily the end of the world, and can be functional. And in fact, actually, I would argue can be really good for democracy. We'll get to that in a second. And we'll get to how you can engage with, I'll give you some thoughts about how you could engage with a minority government and hopefully how that might be beneficial for you. So the coalition lost 19 seats at the last election. It'll be very difficult for them to claw back enough seats in one election to win government. It requires something like 6%. A uniform or almost, there's never such a thing as a uniform swing, we know that, but it requires a very solid swing of around 6% nationally, which is a very big swing. We won't see that in this election. We'll see some swings for the coalition in some seats, some swings, obviously remember that the coalition is a coalition. It's the Liberal Party and National Party together that makes the coalition. There'll be different swings for both parties. There'll be swings to the independents in some seats, and we'll get to some of the other factors in a moment. So it's really interesting. It's a fascinating election. I think one of the probably, if not the most fascinating election we may have ever had in Australian history is my argument, but I'll tell you why I think that in a second. However, according to the latest Resolve political monitor, Peter Dutton appears to have gained ground where 36% of voters backed Mr. Dutton as their preferred Prime Minister compared to 35% who supported Anthony Albanese. So it's, Dutton is climbing in popularity, 35 to 36% isn't high. It probably reflects more than anything, dissatisfaction with politics generally. And as people know, broadly speaking, the thing that always saddens me, amazes me, but in some respects doesn't surprise me sometimes as well, is that there are huge amounts of people that don't engage with politics until very close to the election campaign. Obviously not the people on the line today, but I've done my fair share of door knocking, my fair share of campaigning in my life, and that figure has increased as we've gone on. It used to be that there was sort of 7-8% of people who were what was called swinging voters. Those people now, that figure is now up to 25%. It's a huge amount of people swinging, unaligned, disinterested. You can call it what you will, but it's a group, very big and growing amount of people, number of people who are fundamentally they have the result of the election in the palm of their hands. And so engaging with those people is what's very difficult for government to do, government and opposition to do, because they are by their very nature not interested, not engaged, not listening. They're in their own pathway. They're on their own, they're on their own rut. They're looking at the stuff that they're looking at in Facebook, Twitter, probably not even Twitter, but they're looking at stuff. And as we know, we curate information for ourselves that reflects our own value set, no more so than perhaps people in that disengaged space. So it's very hard to reach these people. People are increasingly disengaged from mainstream media. Television is increasingly not the only way, or certainly not the main way, that people are receiving information. And so for all those reasons, it's actually really hard to reach these people, to get to them. And so it becomes an incredible, almost unfathomable task for government and coalitions and political parties and candidates to reach these people. So where does that leave us? What the factor that I think is really fascinating is the crossbench. And that's what's really interesting. I was listening with great interest to Simon Holmes à Court, who is the main funder of the climate group of independents, so-called Teals. They're also rebadging themselves as the community independents, really because they are coming out of the community in many respects. They are sort of homegrown, local, on the doorstep, on the street corner, at the local fete, at the school gate, local ridge ditch, people who have come, from being generated from local campaigns and local issues. That's what's really interesting. And I was listening to him just speak a week or two ago with Patricia Cavalis on Radio National, where he said that they were going to be funding 30 candidates and 30 campaigns at this federal election. Now, if anyone knows about the breakup of the parliament at the moment, we have sort of about 7 or 8, maybe 6 or 7, depending on whether you want to label some of them as Teals. Kylie Tink was sort of partly funded by Simon Holmes à Court, but she's sort of separated a little bit from them. She's now got a lot of, she's an interesting case in point anyway. She's recruited 15 staff for her own campaign, 15 full-time staff currently. And that's been backed by corporate sponsorship and corporate investment. Kylie's a former client of mine. I've worked with her 3 times. I know her very well. She's a great person, but as anyone knows, and we'll get to the redistribution in a moment, her seat will be abolished, probably most likely at the next election by any. It's very unlikely that the recommendations of the AEC's federal redistribution report will be overturned. So what's that going to look like? Well, we're going to see, remember, you've got already in place before the Teals phenomena in the last election, you've got Helen Haines, Andrew Wilkie, Bob Katter, Rebecca Sharkey, already there and in place. They're not going to go. They're entrenched. And as you probably have seen and noticed, once a independent has taken hold of a seat, they tend to stay in power and tend to keep their seat. And one of the reasons they do that is that they make sure that anything that they do is incredibly locally focused. If I'm ever approaching Andrew Wilkie or Helen Haines or Rebecca Sharkey, they'll get on they may take a meeting, but after 5 minutes, if Rebecca's on the call or if Andrew's on the call, or Andrew Wilkie doesn't even do a meeting until it's been vetted by his chief of staff. Every meeting does a pre-meeting with his chief of staff before he even gets there. So he's not wasting his time on something that doesn't have a local focus. Now, yeah, we know Andrew Wilkie also does some other issues that aren't local, but a lot of his time is spent, a lot of these independents who were there before the Teals phenomena, they very much have a very local focus, and so they should have, and that's what's keeping them in power. That's what's keeping them in control of their seat and keeping their local community engaged and supporting them. So, they have a huge amount of money. They had a conference a few weeks ago where I think Simon Holmes of course said there was something like 650 people registered to attend. Last year, or the conference at the same point before the last election, only had 150 people at it. So that just shows you the amount of growth in these local campaigns. Remember that, you've got to remember that someone like Dai Li, who is not, again, she's not a Teals person per se, but she does just sort of tend to sort of broadly throw her, her sort of weight in with those people. She's a former Liberal councillor in that area. She decided to run after the election was called at the last election, when we had Christina Keneally, who was a former Premier of New South Wales, who was a Labor candidate, and she had a nearly 30% swing. Labor had its 30% swing in what has been always a Labor seat. So the thing about a crossbench campaign is that it's completely unpredictable. It is something that could capture people's imagination. It can, people just go, yeah, they're one of us. They live next door. They live down the road. Their kids go to my school. My kids' school. I see them at the local footy team. I see them at the local RSL. I see them down at the, in the main street shopping at Coles or Woolworths. They are local people, and that is the credibility that these people bring. And I think that, it will be fascinating. There will be, I think, my prediction, for what it's worth, is that there will be, Kelly, I'll just get to your comment in just 1 second. There will be more independents in the lower house. I think all of the ones that are there at the moment will retain their seats. Even Monique Ryan in the seat of Kooyong. I think Josh Frydenberg probably would have thrown his hat back in the ring had the redistribution thrown up a different, predicted result. The redistribution's made, if anything, the seat less likely to return to the Liberal Party. So I think even Monique Ryan and others will be returned. So I think you'll see more independents. We'll also possibly see a couple more Greens in the lower house as well. Remember, at the last election, the Greens won seats from the Liberal Party and the Labor Party. They're going to be campaigning really hard on very mainstream issues like rent. And there is every likelihood that they will be seen as, the renters' sort of spokespeople, saviour, whatever you want to call it. 37 or 39% of Australians are renters. They don't all vote one way. They vote in all sorts of different ways. And so if some of those, change their votes, who knows what that's going to look like. When you throw in some independents who might then preference Greens, we will have a really complicated election night result. So, hold on to your horses and hold on to your hats in advance of that. Kelly's asking, would you recommend investing in crossbench relationships to try and buffer? You've got a really complicated question there, Kelly. I might take that offline, just because it's really very detailed. Could I get you to email me back to the requests that you got for this meeting today? And we will take this offline. But yes, I always would recommend investing in crossbench relationships. And let me explain the reason. What's going to happen is this. Last time we had a minority government, it was great for external engagement and great for trying to get stuff done and great for trying to push agendas, because the two major parties can't just roll over. We might see 25, 30 non-major party people in the House. You know, we don't know. Who knows? But it's going to be a significant block of votes. And so those people won't vote in the same way. They won't vote uniformly. And so there is opportunity to talk to them all. It's a lot more work, considerable amounts of work, but it's really important to do. And you sort of almost got to take an approach of, I watched some, movies about and looked at documentaries about how people lobby in America. I'd love to have worked in America. I probably won't, but, they really do lobby individuals to move their vote in different ways. If we have a block of 20 or 30 people in the lower house, it's going to look like that, because the major parties will vote in a certain way, but they then are going to have to get the government, who will have, I think the Labor will probably be returned in a minority government with the support of the independents. They will need to get those people across the line. They won't all vote uniformly on all issues. They'll guarantee supply. They won't move frivolous motions of no confidence in the House. But at the same time, it is unpredictable as to what you may or may not see. Kelly, I'm just sending you, excuse me, everyone, my email address. Please don't hesitate if you can just cut and paste that in question, and I'll send it to you. We'll engage on that question. So what's going to happen? That's the $1 million question, or the $1 billion question, perhaps. Polls are one thing. Just 1 second. I'm just going to have a glass of water. Sorry. It's all happening today. So polls are one thing, obviously, but domestic and, global developments are just fascinating, and how it's going to play out is another thing. We've got interest rates, this sort of cost of living crisis, in reality, so-called, badged, labelled, used, exploited by both sides of politics. All sides of politics are very commonly referring to the cost of living crisis that has a dents people's consciousness. It makes them think, even if they're not necessarily as stressed as they perhaps might be. It gives them a perception that times are tough. We're not in a recession yet. The unemployment rate is low, but we've got other pressures on us. But we've got, lots of different things that are happening. We've got the opposition agenda on migration, their cost of living, the cost of living mantra, and now nuclear energy, which is really controversial. And it'll be really interesting to see. Someone asked me last week how I thought that will play out. I think it's hard to know. There's some low levels of support. There's much greater support for solar energy and renewables. If you're looking at recent polls, in terms of a bounce on that, I think it's yet to play out. But I think there is certainly an opportunity for Labor to exploit, not only the cost, but the safety and the speed of being able to get up nuclear energy to answer Australia's immediate and short and medium-term energy needs. The other thing, there's other factors like the possible return to the White House of Donald Trump. What's that going to do to things internationally. I read something a day or two ago, I think it was The Guardian or maybe the New York Times, about, you know, it allowing, you know, the possible return of Donald Trump, dare we say, will sort of give a fillip to, you know, conservative leaders or conservative politicians, of which Peter Dutton is one. And so it will be interesting to see how he, if you know, remember, there is an election probably before us in terms of America, probably more likely than not. And if he's returned, how does Peter Dutton respond to that? How is Donald Trump perceived here? There's so many different things that may come into play there. You know, as well as the leadership styles of the leaders themselves, you know, it seems like, you know, we all said a few years ago that, you know, Peter Dutton could never become Prime Minister because of the sort of grumpy, you know, abrasiveness that he has. But I think that his sort of straightforward, almost, you know, pretty clear, you know, call it alarmist, but you can call it what you want, but it's sort of working because polls are saying that, you know, he's going up in people's perceptions. So that's interesting. And, you know, if I was the Prime Minister, I wouldn't be sleeping easy at the moment. It's not an easy time. There's also the AEC federal redistribution, which broadly favoured Labor. There's a few more seats which will go to Labor. There's a couple of Labor seats. There's a Labor seat in Victoria that's going to be abolished. There's a new seat in Perth that will be a Labor seat by the looks of it. And Kylie Tink's seat's been absorbed into other seats, mainly Bradfield, of which it's probably likely that, you know, whether or not she stands, there was already a Teal candidate there from the last election who did pretty well. It'll be really interesting to see what happens there in terms of that campaign. But it looks likely that Bradfield may turn to become an independent seat. And, you know, so broadly speaking, the redistribution has broadly favoured Labor. Not hugely, but broadly. So, you know, moves towards coalition governments, you know, globally, as I was saying before, it's really interesting. You know, it's something that's been happening and actually something that's been in place very commonly in lots and lots and lots of countries for many decades, if not, you know, centuries. And it's something that we are perhaps going to need to get to grips with, particularly if we have, you know, 20 or 30 people on the floor of the House, which is a very different proposition than having a Senate that is messy. A messy Senate, something that we're used to. We're not used to a messy House of Representatives, and it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. Moreover, how a government can be seen and perceived by the electorate with, you know, voting, or, you know, managing government with the support of the independents. What's going to happen the election after as well, I think, is something that will be in the mind of the Labor Party at the moment. So what else do we need to think about? And again, if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to jump in and ask in the Q&A box. So one of the things you need to be thinking about in terms of the election campaign is how you might engage with it, what you might do. One of the things that you can do is make sure that you allow, you let your local candidates, if you're a locally based service or organisation or company, let them know that you're prepared to engage with them. You know, Labor, Liberal, wherever you might choose to reach out to all the parties, all the candidates. You might choose to host a debate around an issue. That's something that is a really good thing to do. But it might be that you're just trying to pitch a policy, get a policy developed on the run up to the election, get a commitment for spending on the run up to the election. And so it's really important to have that work done now, because we don't know, there might be an election called sooner than later. So obviously we can get lost in what's going on, but obviously making sure that you've got your vision and a very clear set of messages and a call to action. What is it that you're wanting? Is it funding? Is it, you know, development of a policy? Is it support for a local service? Is it support for an issue? Do you want to have a debate? Whatever it is that is you're looking for, make sure that you've got that clearly worked out now. I'd urge you to do some work now to get that underway. So it's important, obviously, not only do you have to engage with the candidates and ministers and shadow ministers. Remember, when we go into an election, government goes into a caretaker mode, and so they stop spending money and making decisions. Departments then take over those sorts of the administrative running of the portfolio. But there are other audiences that can come into play and help influence your discussion. Jean's asked, are the ministerial advisors less influential in this government than others? You hear less about individual advisors than you did in the Rudd government, for example. At least that's my impression. Good point, Jean. I think that's probably you know, I probably know, you know, as many. I worked in the Rudd government. I worked in the Rudd and Gillard government. I knew all of the advisors, and I know a lot of the advisors in this current government. I think the fact that they don't have a personality and there's not coverage of them is a good thing. That shows that they're doing what they should be doing. They should be advising in the background rather than being the story. But you know, I know, you know, most chiefs of staff, and they're all solid, you know, good, experienced operators. And so I think that's a good thing that they're not becoming the story. That would be my answer to that. Hope that helps. One of the things that is really important to do is, I'll come to your question about candidates in a second. That's the next question. Is a win-win scenario. So what is something that you're going to propose that's going to help them? So, you know, can you suggest, you know, look at where the most marginal seats is. This is being incredibly callous and incredibly politically focused, but where is an alignment between where the candidates, or where the government or whoever wants to win, and perhaps what you're doing? Where's an alignment in terms of their policy or expenditure focuses? Where are some of the things that they've already committed to that you could align with? So not necessarily just geographical spend, but also alignment on policy and solving problems. Someone else has just asked, what's the best way of getting a list of candidates and their contact details? If you're talking about a local candidates in your local seat, really it's just research. It's about calling the party and you know, putting on Google alerts if you don't have media monitoring, putting on Google alerts for the particular seat. And so when you see coverage on, you know, X, Y, or Z, you know, and the other thing is that as soon as the nominations close, they'll be publicly available. And so they'll be announced probably via the Australian Electoral Commission's website, but really you just got to keep on top of it. One of the other things that can really help you in terms of communicating what you're wanting is have some human stories, both that resonates with local candidates, perhaps allow, you know, ministers or shadow ministers to come and visit you and help illustrate what it is their thing's going to do for people. Fundamentally, you know, we're not just dealing about facts and figures, really. Most people aren't interested with facts and figures. But you know, we're talking about, you know, human stories. And so what does that look like? And how can you incorporate those into some of the, you know, the details that you're going to be pushing forward? Some of the things that you can do during election or on the run-up to election, particularly during election itself, but even on the run-up to election, is hosting an event. As I said before, a debate, utilize your own media, use media channels to make some statements. You know, it's not about you taking sides, and I'm acutely aware that the ACNC, you know, particularly dictates that you cannot be political and partisan. But you know, you can certainly be lobbying and advocating for the issues that you are advocating for, getting your community or your networks involved, and also you know, implementing, you know, some paid ads as well. If you're thinking about events, thinking about paid ads to get people along or get people involved, perhaps, you know, writing letters, sending emails, attending events, whatever it is you're asking people to do. So integrating your government engagement with your, with your government, with your communications is something that works really well, we find. And so, obviously, politicians are really influenced by public perceptions, no more so than an election campaign. And, there's lots and lots of people that they're filled with staffers constantly working to understand and reflect and head off issues in that local community, or moreover, more broadly on any particular issue. Making sure that you have, you're able to sort of increase that community trust or show that community trust around issues. And, returning on investment is something that you need to be able to demonstrate. So how will doing the thing you're asking them to do, whatever that is, policy, investment, whatever it is, local service, whatever the thing is you're asking them to do, how does that thing bring dividends for the government or for the community or for whoever it is? So how can you demonstrate that? Yes, you will, David. I'll be sending out the slides and the recording after the webinar. Identifying the media your target audience consumes. So obviously understanding, where that might, who it is that you're needing to communicate with. Really local stuff, local papers, local community radio, local bloggers. There's always people out there to talk to. If you're in Canberra and you're wanting to influence, this is to give you an example, there's lots of outlets here. So, but if you're in, Orange, there's going to be different outlets there and perhaps some bloggers and other little things. So, you need to then work out what you're wanting to do. Is it national? Is it local? Is it hyper local? Is it regional? Is it all of those things? It could be. So making sure that you're across that media is really important. Tell stories that bolster your key asks. So help what you're wanting, help what you're asking for by demonstrating, the benefits via a story that demonstrates the benefit of what it is you're asking for. This thing, this ask, delivering this thing is going to help people like John, Emma, Bill, Sue, whatever, Steve, who've already been benefited or want this to happen or need this to happen or whatever it is, right? So making sure that you can illustrate that. That's where the media will pick up on stuff, right? And so that's really important to use. The other thing that you need to think of, and we're just getting to the end of the webinar now, so if anyone's got any questions, please do jump into the Q&A box and pop them in. But being prepared, it's a long haul between now and May, not August, for an election. I will just look into that. I'm thinking that they could have a full Senate election if they go beyond May. Maybe that's where I'm getting confused. But I'll qualify that and I'll clarify that when I email the slides. But let's just say we're looking at May, there's a long time to go between now and then. And so making sure that you can resource it, making sure that you've got some pace in terms of what you're doing, thinking about how you're going to schedule events, keeping that momentum up. If you just decide to do something, 3 weeks out of the election, it's not going to go anywhere. You need to be thinking about, building those campaigns now, building that narrative, building those discussions now. It's really, really, really important to do that. The other thing that you need to think about is being able to justify it to yourselves, to your organization, to your network, to your members, to your funders, to whoever, is being able to measure what it is you're doing. So think about if it's going to be something that you're going to invest some time and effort into, think about measuring what that's going to look like. Having a strategy, it might not be that complicated, but having a strategy that will allow you to have some benchmarks, have some activities, what it is that you're wanting to achieve from those activities along the way is really important as well. So you can really turn back, look back over your shoulder and go, we did that, and it did help us deliver X, Y, and Z. And, one of the things that's really important is sustaining your government engagement relationships. You probably already have relationships with some people. And I'll come to your comment, Alex. Thanks so much for doing the research for me in the background. It's very hard to do research and to deliver the webinar at the same time. So you are a great help. You probably already have contacts and relationships with people. If you don't, you've got to go and make them, and ask people to introduce you to people. People will help. That's what they do. That's what government does, or what it should be doing, is to help get rid of roadblocks and help solve problems. And so that's what, they should be doing for you and help you doing. So, ask people to help, ask people for names, ask people for contacts, ask people for introductions. I think that's all really important and very valid to do. So there you go. Yes, Alex has said that the earliest date is August 2024 for the half Senate. Yep. Okay. Yep. No, good point. Alex, you should come and work for us. You are completely on the money here. Good on you. So thanks so much, everyone. Good luck with whatever you do between now and the next election. It's going to be a doozy. It will be really fascinating. We have another webinar coming up in July. We have monthly webinars, and we are looking at the platform Third Sector. We're inviting them to be our guest for the webinar to talk about the platform and the sorts of stories that they look for, the sorts of things that they do, the sorts of things they publicize, the sorts of stories that they're interested in. So it'll be a really good one. We will send out an invite to people about that. But if that's something that you're interested in and you don't have an access to it, then please let me know and I will send you the link. Kelly's asked, what sort of evidence helps with policy papers, asks funding requests we're walking towards preparing? Yeah, social return on investment's great. It's not necessarily just social, right? What do you mean by social? I'd need to probably look at the metrics of what you're doing. Really happy to talk about it, or even look at the document. It's got to be establishing that it's needed, that there is a benefit. There's an economic benefit from making this investment, whatever that is and whatever that looks like. So it's not just about, yes, there's going to be social return. If government did everything that everyone asked them to do, they'd be in a massive deficit. The economy would probably tank, but they'd solve a lot of social problems. They're not going to do that. But when they make some choices between A, B, or C in terms of things that they're going to fund, there's lots of reasons why they may or may not fund things. There's lots of, as you know, it's political, it's all sorts of things, it's pressure. But one of the things that they absolutely do is look at the benefit and being able to justify the spend in different ways. So what is the return on investment? What are the problems that will be solved? What's the spending that will be reduced or cut or eradicated if this spending is done? So if this thing happens, what's the flow-on, positive economic, financial flow-on effects from that? So that's really important. So thanks, Alex. It wasn't a serious job offer, but, just keep it in mind. So thank you so much, everyone, for really happy, Kelly, if you want to, please send me that other question because I didn't get to answer that earlier detailed question. And if you want me to have a look at that document or talk to you about it, really happy to do that. But please join us for the webinar next month. And we will be doing other pre-election webinars. I can't help myself because it is quite a fascinating year and a fascinating election. So can't help myself but get involved with some sort of predictions and crystal ball gazing, which is sort of all that you can do, really. But thank you so much, and have a great remainder of the day. I've been having the television on at the same time. We have not seen Mr. Assange walk out of the Saipan courtroom, so it has not happened yet. But it is an interesting day. And also for anyone at rugby league players, rugby league supporters, or particularly Blues supporters watching or listening, go the Blues. I'd like to just end on that. So thanks so much. Really grateful for your time today. And don't hesitate to email me with any questions that you have. Thanks a lot for joining.